The city exhaled its secrets in the dead of night, a symphony of distant sirens and rain-slicked streets. Inside the restaurant, the air was heavy with the scent of starched linen and candle wax, a fragile veneer of elegance masking the decay beneath. Daniel Kane sat at a corner table, his fingers tracing the rim of an untouched water glass, his eyes fixed on the door. The chandelier above cast fractured light across the room, glinting off silverware and the polished lies of the other diners. This was no ordinary night. It was the night the world he'd built would begin to burn. She entered at exactly 8:17 p.m., moving with the precision of someone who knew every eye was on her. Marissa Kane, his wife of 7 years, wore a black dress that clung to her like a second skin, its simplicity a deliberate weapon. Her dark hair fell in calculated waves, framing a face that could disarm or destroy with a single glance. But it was the necklace that caught Daniel's attention, a delicate silver chain with a sapphire pendant, a gift from their 5th anniversary, back when love still felt like a promise instead of a prison. She hadn't worn it in over a year. Tonight, it gleamed against her throat like a declaration of war. Marissa slid into the chair across from him, her movements fluid, almost rehearsed. "I wasn't sure you'd show," she said, her voice low and smooth, tinged with a mockery that masqueraded as warmth. She picked up the wine list, her eyes skimming the page without focus, as if the act itself were a performance. "I said I'd be here," Daniel replied, his tone even, betraying nothing. His hands rested on the table, steady despite the storm building inside him. He'd chosen this restaurant with care, a place steeped in their shared history, where they'd once laughed over shared plates and whispered dreams under soft lighting. Now, it was a stage for something else entirely. "You're always so reliable," Marissa said, her lips curling into a faint smile that didn't reach her eyes. The words carried weight, a familiar sting dressed up as praise. She set the wine list down as the waiter approached, a young man with a practiced smile and overly polished shoes. Marissa ordered a bottle of Bordeaux, her voice clipped and commanding. "Expensive, of course." Daniel didn't object. Why would he? Tonight wasn't about money. The wine arrived, and Marissa poured it herself, filling both glasses with a steady hand. No toast, no clink of crystal. She took a sip, the glass catching the light as she set it down with a soft click. For the first time, she looked at him directly, her hazel eyes sharp and unyielding. "I'm not going to pretend," she said, her voice cutting through the hum of the restaurant. "You should know that now." "I didn't expect you to," Daniel said, leaning back slightly, his gaze locked on hers. He'd known this moment was coming, had felt it creeping closer for months, like a shadow lengthening at dusk. But hearing her say it, seeing the certainty in her posture, made it real in a way that twisted something deep inside him. "I'm also not going to lie," Marissa continued, her tone measured, almost clinical. "I know how much you hate that." She paused, watching him, waiting for a reaction he refused to give. "I've been seeing him for about 6 months. Maybe a little longer. It's hard to pinpoint when it started. It wasn't deliberate at first. Just talking, texting. Then," she trailed off, her eyes searching his face, probing for cracks in his composure. Daniel said nothing. The silence stretched between them, taut as a wire. He could feel the weight of her words, each one a calculated blow meant to provoke, to wound. But he'd spent too many nights preparing for this to let her see him flinch. Marissa took another sip of wine, her movements deliberate, as if buying time to gauge his response. "You don't seem surprised," she said, tilting her head slightly, a flicker of curiosity breaking through her mask. "I'm not," he said simply. His voice was calm, but beneath it ran a current of something darker, something she couldn't quite name. "Not even angry," she pressed, her tone sharpening, a hint of frustration creeping in. She leaned forward, her necklace catching the light, a reminder of the life they'd once shared. Daniel shook his head, his expression unreadable. "No." For a moment, uncertainty flickered in her eyes, a crack in her carefully constructed armor. She laughed, a quiet, brittle sound that didn't match the confidence she was trying to project. "You're really going to sit there and let me say all this without reacting?" "I'm listening," Daniel said, his voice steady, almost gentle. "You're talking. That's what this dinner was for." Marissa's composure faltered, her fingers tightening around the stem of her glass. She was used to control, to dictating the rhythm of their interactions. But tonight, something was off. Daniel wasn't playing the role she'd written for him, the betrayed husband, the wounded man begging for answers. He was something else, something she couldn't predict, and it unnerved her. "I was unhappy," she said, her voice quieter now, but no less sharp. "I felt invisible. You made me feel like a roommate, not a wife." "I know," Daniel said, his words soft but weighted with an understanding that made her pause. "I'm aware." She stared at him, her lips parting slightly, as if searching for a response that wouldn't come. "You're still not going to say anything?" she asked, her voice rising just enough to betray her frustration. "I already have," Daniel said, folding his napkin with deliberate care. "Just not yet." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Marissa studied him, really studied him, her eyes narrowing as if trying to decipher a puzzle that had suddenly changed shape. "I don't know what game you think you're playing," she said, a trace of heat bleeding into her tone for the first time. "No game," Daniel replied, his voice calm but firm. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze piercing. "I brought you here so you'd be comfortable when you said it. That was important to you." Marissa's breath caught, her posture stiffening. "When I said what?" "That you cheated," Daniel said, his words slow and deliberate, each one landing like a stone in still water. "That you don't regret it. That you felt nothing while doing it." Her lips parted, but no sound came. For the first time, the confidence drained from her face, replaced by something closer to shock. She tried to scoff, to reclaim her footing, but the edge was gone. "What is this?" she asked, her voice quieter now, almost unsteady. "Some kind of passive-aggressive performance?" "No," Daniel said, his tone final. "This is acknowledgement. Closure. For you. For both of us." Marissa pushed her chair back slightly, her arms folding across her chest, a defensive gesture that betrayed her unease. "If you think this changes anything." "I don't need it to change anything," Daniel interrupted, not loudly, but with a quiet authority that silenced her. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope, plain, heavy, unmarked. Her eyes flicked to it, then back to him, a question forming in her gaze. "What's that?" she asked, her voice tight. "You'll find out later," Daniel said, placing the envelope on the table between them. She reached for it, but he pulled it back half an inch, his movements precise. "Not here." Marissa's hand froze, then dropped to her lap, irritation flashing across her face. "You're being dramatic," she said, but the words lacked conviction. "No," Daniel said, standing slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'm being efficient." She looked around, as if suddenly aware of the other diners, the soft clink of glasses, the illusion of normalcy surrounding them. "You're walking out?" she asked, her voice a mix of disbelief and defiance. "Yes," Daniel said, adjusting his jacket. "Exactly because of what you said." He placed the envelope on her bread plate, its weight subtle but undeniable. "Read it at home," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "And remember how quiet tonight was. How controlled." Marissa didn't speak as he turned and walked away, but he could feel her eyes boring into his back, a mix of anger and uncertainty. The restaurant's glow faded behind him as he stepped into the rain-soaked street, the city's pulse thrumming around him. Let her sit in the light of the chandeliers she once loved. Let her sip the wine and think she still held the upper hand. By dawn, she'd understand what this night really was, a prelude to a reckoning she'd never seen coming. The city never truly darkened, not even at 2 a.m. Its lights bled into the night, a restless glow that mirrored the unease gnawing at Daniel Kane's mind. He sat in the driver's seat of his car, parked in an alley 2 blocks from their house, a house that no longer felt like home. The rain had stopped, leaving the air thick with the scent of wet asphalt and regret. His laptop rested on the passenger seat, its screen casting a cold blue light across his face. A folder titled Contingency stared back at him, a digital vault of truths he'd never wanted to collect. It hadn't happened all at once. Betrayal never does. It creeps in, quiet as a shadow, slipping into the cracks of a life you thought was solid. For Daniel, it started with the silences, those moments when Marissa's laughter stopped short, when her eyes lingered on her phone instead of him. The "I'm tired" that replaced "good night." The way she'd pull away when he reached for her in bed, her body tense, her excuses thin. "Work's been brutal. I just need space." He'd believed her at first, or wanted to. He told himself it was a phase, a rough patch weathered by stress. But the truth has a way of cutting through lies, sharp and relentless, like a blade you don't see until it's already drawn blood. The first real clue came 3 months ago, on a Tuesday night in late March. Marissa had come home late, her gym bag slung over her shoulder, her hair dry despite the hour she'd supposedly spent at a spin class. She smelled of jasmine, not sweat, her makeup flawless in a way that screamed intention. She brushed past him in the hallway, her eyes avoiding his, her voice clipped. "Long day," she'd said, disappearing into the bathroom before he could respond. Daniel stood there, staring at the closed door, a quiet dread settling in his chest. He told himself to let it go, to stop imagining things. But imagination wasn't the problem. Instinct was. The next morning, he did something he'd never thought he'd do. He logged into their shared phone plan, his fingers hesitating over the keys, as if crossing a line he couldn't uncross. There it was, a number saved under Lauren, a name he knew but hadn't heard in months. The texts were relentless, late-night bursts, early morning replies, dozens in a single day. None of it matched the casual check-ins of a friend. Daniel's pulse quickened as he scrolled, each message a pinprick of betrayal. He didn't confront her, not then. Instead, he asked, "You've been distracted lately. Everything okay?" His voice was gentle, probing, giving her a chance to explain. Marissa didn't flinch. She tied her hair back, her movements deliberate, and looked at him with a pitying smile. "Don't start being one of those husbands, Daniel," she said, her tone light but laced with venom. "The insecure type. It's not attractive." The words landed like a slap, turning his concern into a flaw, his questions into weakness. That was the moment something shifted inside him. Not anger, not yet, but a quiet resolve to see what lay beneath her polished surface. From there, the signs multiplied, each one a brick in the wall he was building around the truth. Marissa's phone became a fortress, always angled away, her fingers quick to lock the screen when he entered the room. Conversations cut off mid-sentence, her laughter fading into silence when he appeared. She'd mock him subtly, her compliments laced with condescension. "You're so dependable," she'd say, as if reliability were a disease. At a family dinner, her mother asked about vacation plans, and Daniel mentioned Italy, a dream they'd once shared. Marissa's laugh was sharp, cutting. "You've been talking about it," she said, her eyes glinting with disdain. "I'm still deciding if I want to be seen with you on a beach." The table laughed, oblivious to the cruelty. Daniel didn't. He saw it for what it was, a performance, a way to diminish him in front of others. Then came the call from Lauren, Marissa's friend who'd been absent for nearly a year. It was a Wednesday afternoon, the kind of gray day that made the city feel like it was holding its breath. Lauren's voice was tight, hesitant, as if she were stepping into a minefield. "I know this is out of bounds," she said, "but you should know something. Marissa, she's not who you think she is right now." She didn't offer details, and Daniel didn't ask. The tremor in her voice was enough, a crack in the facade Marissa had built. "Thank you," he said, and hung up, his mind already racing. That night, as Marissa got ready in the bathroom, humming softly to herself, Daniel opened his laptop and created the contingency folder. Screenshots of texts, phone logs, bank charges for dinners and hotels he hadn't known about. A copy of their prenup, its clauses stark and unyielding. Notes on her habits, her lies, her patterns. It wasn't obsession. It was preparation. The final piece fell in a place a week before her birthday, when Lauren called again. Her voice was heavier this time, weighted with guilt. "I can get you proof," she said, sounding more exhausted than heroic. "They're going out Friday. A rooftop bar. She's meeting someone, not me." Lauren gave him the details: time, place, a venue with overpriced cocktails, and a view that screamed privilege. "I'll text you if I see him," she added. "You'll know for sure." Daniel thanked her, his voice calm, but inside, something hardened, like steel cooling after a forge. He didn't wait for her text. That Friday, he parked across from the bar, hidden in the shadows of a shuttered florist shop. He wore a dark cap, his car's tinted windows shielding him from prying eyes. Marissa arrived first, her red lipstick bold, her dress a statement he'd never seen before, tight, deliberate, meant to draw attention. 11 minutes later, he arrived. "Derek." Daniel recognized him instantly, a tall, smug real estate broker they'd met once, years ago, when Marissa consulted for his firm. His handshake had been too firm, his smile too knowing. Now, watching them disappear into the elevator to the private lounge, Daniel felt no surprise, only clarity. The text from Lauren came minutes later. "He's here." Attached was a photo, Marissa laughing, her head thrown back, Derek's hand resting on her thigh under the table. It was a scene so natural it felt like a betrayal of its own, a glimpse of the life she'd chosen over him. Daniel didn't storm the bar. He didn't call her name or shatter the glass in his hand. He saved the photo, added it to the folder, and drove home. The next day, he met with an attorney in a nondescript office downtown, a man who specialized in clean exits. Daniel laid out his evidence, texts, photos, receipts, a timeline of lies. The attorney nodded, his expression clinical. "You've got her pinned," he said. "This will be surgical." Daniel liked that word. Surgical. Precise. Final. That night, as Marissa slept, Daniel cloned her phone, a task made easier by another girl's night with Lauren. The clone data was a floodgate, messages to Derek, laced with a casual cruelty that made Daniel's skin crawl. "He doesn't even see it," she'd written. "I could sleep with you in our bed, and he'd still ask if I need anything before work." She described their marriage as a dead branch, himself as a paycheck with shoes. She pitied him, she said. Not hated, not resented, pitted. That was the moment Daniel stopped feeling. The pain didn't vanish, it simply ceased to matter. The truth wasn't a wound anymore. It was a weapon. He planned the dinner with the precision of a chess master, choosing the restaurant where they'd once celebrated milestones, now a stage for her confession. He made the reservation under her name, ordered her favorite wine, requested a corner table with soft lighting. When she agreed to meet, her reply came with a smiley face, a small flourish of her confidence. She thought she was walking into a negotiation. Daniel knew it was a trap. Now, sitting in his car, the dinner behind him, Daniel stared at the laptop screen, the contingency folder open. The envelope he'd left on her bread plate contained only a note. "Read this at home. Alone." It was a decoy, a way to keep her off balance until the real blow landed. Somewhere across town, Marissa was still at the restaurant, sipping wine, believing she'd won. But the clock was ticking, and by dawn, the world she'd built on lies would begin to collapse. The city's pulse quickened as midnight approached, its neon veins throbbing against the black sky. Daniel Kane sat in a bare-bones rental apartment downtown, the kind of place where the walls held no memories and the silence was a comfort. A single lamp cast a stark glow over the room, illuminating a coffee table with 2 mugs, one empty, one untouched. His laptop hummed softly, the contingency folder open, its contents a meticulously crafted arsenal of truths. Outside, the world churned on, oblivious to the storm he'd set in motion. Inside, Daniel felt only stillness, a calm that comes when the pieces of a long game finally align. Marissa was still at the restaurant when the first domino fell. Daniel pictured her there, swirling her Bordeaux, her posture perfect, her mind buzzing with the thrill of her confession. She thought she'd seized control, that her words had cut him down to something small and manageable. She was wrong. At 12:03 a.m., an email landed in her work inbox, subject line, "Client matter, urgent review required." It wasn't from a colleague or a client. It was anonymous, untraceable, sent from a burner account Daniel had set up weeks ago. The email contained a single PDF attachment, a dossier detailing her misuse of the corporate credit card. Spa receipts, hotel charges, duplicate invoices for nights she'd spent in a downtown suite with Derek, not on-site with vendors as she'd claimed. Each entry was time-stamped, cross-referenced with location data from her cloned phone. The evidence was surgical, undeniable. A blade slipped between the ribs of her carefully curated life. Daniel leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled, his eyes fixed on the city skyline beyond the window. He didn't need to imagine her reaction. He knew her too well, her habits, her tells, the way she'd tilt her head when cornered, searching for an escape. She wouldn't open the email until morning, likely dismissing it as a late-night nuisance. That was fine. The timing was deliberate, designed to let her sleep one last night in the illusion of victory. By 7 a.m., When she tried to badge into the office garage and found her access denied, the first crack would appear. She'd text him then, he was sure. Hey, something's wrong with the door. You know anything about this? He wouldn't answer. He didn't need to. The second blow landed at 12:37 a.m. in a quiet suburban neighborhood where Derek lived with his wife, Emily, and their 2 children. A small white envelope slid into their mailbox, no return address, sealed with care. Inside was a USB drive, a handful of printed photos, and a note in clean, unadorned type. Thought you deserved the truth. The photos were carefully chosen. Marissa and Derek at the rooftop bar, his hand on her thigh, her laughter caught mid-frame. Another from a hotel lobby, their bodies too close for misinterpretation. The USB held more. Text messages, voicemails, a timeline of their affair laid bare. Emily would find it in the morning, perhaps while sipping coffee in their magazine-perfect kitchen. She'd open it, and her world would shift, just as Daniel's had. He felt no satisfaction in this, only necessity. Marissa had built her house of lies on borrowed time. Now, the debt was due. Daniel's phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. A text from Marissa, earlier than he'd expected. What was in the envelope? Why are you doing this? He stared at the screen, his thumb hovering over the reply button, then set the phone face down. Let her wonder. Let her stew in the ambiguity of that plain, heavy envelope he'd left on her bread plate. It was just a note, a placeholder, a way to keep her off balance until the real consequences hit. The real envelope, the one that mattered, was already in motion, its contents dismantling her life piece by piece. He stood and crossed to the window, the city sprawling below like a chessboard. The locks on their house had been changed that afternoon, the key card to their shared condo disabled. A discreet locksmith had handled it, paid in cash with no questions asked. Marissa's belongings, her designer dresses, her jewelry, her curated life, were boxed and waiting in a storage unit she'd never find. The joint accounts were frozen, the credit cards canceled. Her leased car returned to the dealership by courier at 6:15 a.m. Every move was calculated, a series of levers pulled with precision. Daniel wasn't acting on impulse. This was a plan months in the making, born in the quiet moments when Marissa's lies had piled too high to ignore. He thought back to the night he'd cloned her phone, the data spilling across his screen like a confession she'd never intended to make. The messages to Derek were the worst, not for their intimacy, but for their cruelty. He's so predictable, she'd written. Like a dog waiting for a pat on the head. Another, I pity him, honestly. He thinks this is love. Each word was a cut, not because it hurt, but because it revealed her. Marissa didn't just betray him. She dismantled him in her mind, reducing him to a caricature she could discard. That was her mistake. She'd underestimated him, mistaking his silence for weakness, his patience for passivity. The divorce papers had been filed at 11:58 p.m., submitted electronically to the county clerk with an affidavit that left no room for negotiation. Infidelity, financial misconduct, emotional cruelty. The evidence was exhaustive, a litany of her own words and actions turned against her. Daniel's attorney had called it airtight, a legal guillotine poised to fall. Marissa would fight, of course, she always did, but she'd find no leverage, no cracks to exploit. Daniel had spent too long ensuring that. His phone buzzed again. Another text. This isn't funny, Daniel. Call me. He ignored it, pouring himself a cup of coffee from a pot he'd brewed an hour ago. No sugar, no cream, just black, bitter, grounding. He sipped it slowly, letting the heat anchor him to the moment. The city outside was waking up, its lights flickering like stars in a dying sky. Somewhere, Marissa was unraveling, her confidence eroding with every unanswered message, every locked door. She'd try to call again, maybe leave a voicemail, her voice sharp with anger or soft with feigned remorse. It didn't matter. The script was already written, and she was no longer the author. By 2:43 a.m., Daniel lay on the narrow bed in the rental, staring at the ceiling. The room was sparse, functional, a blank slate that suited his purpose. He wasn't running from her, nor hiding. He was simply done with the lies, the games, the woman who'd thought she could rewrite their story without consequence. He closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to savor the quiet. For the first time in months, there was no weight on his chest, no questions clawing at his mind. Only certainty. Marissa, meanwhile, was likely still at the restaurant, or perhaps in a cab, clutching the envelope, her mind racing to decode its meaning. She'd feel the shift soon, the moment when control slipped through her fingers like sand. By morning, when her badge failed, when her emails piled up with demands from HR and her boss, when Derek's wife called with questions she couldn't answer, she'd understand. This wasn't a fight. It wasn't even revenge. It was consequence, cold and deliberate, a mirror held up to the life she'd chosen. Daniel's phone buzzed once more, a voicemail this time. He didn't listen. He didn't need to. The game was over, and Marissa was about to learn what it meant to lose. The city woke with a predatory gleam, its glass towers catching the first light of dawn like knives drawn against the sky. Marissa Kane stood outside the office garage at 6:58 a.m., her badge pressed futilely against the reader, the red light blinking in silent denial. Her breath fogged in the crisp morning air, her fingers trembling not from cold, but from the first stirrings of panic. She swiped again, then a third time, her lips pressing into a thin line. The gate didn't budge. She pulled out her phone, her thumb hovering over Daniel's name, then typed a quick text. Something's wrong with the garage door. You know anything about this? No response. The screen stared back, indifferent, as the city hummed around her, oblivious to the fault lines cracking beneath her life. Marissa's heels clicked against the pavement as she paced, her black coat flapping like a tattered flag. The envelope from last night weighed heavy in her purse, its cryptic note, "Read this at home." Alone. Looping through her mind. She hadn't gone home after the restaurant. Not yet. She'd lingered at the bar, sipping the Bordeaux until the chandeliers dimmed, convincing herself that Daniel's quiet exit was a bluff, a wounded man's attempt to salvage pride. But now, standing in the shadow of her office building, the badge failing in her hand, doubt crept in like a thief. She opened her work email, scrolling past meeting invites and client updates until she saw it. Client matter. Urgent review required. The sender was anonymous, the timestamp 12:03 a.m. Her stomach twisted as she opened the attachment, her eyes scanning the PDF, a litany of charges, receipts, and timestamps documenting her misuse of the corporate card. Hotel suites, spa visits, dinners with Derek, billed as vendor meetings. Each entry was a nail in the coffin of her career, precise and unyielding. She closed the email, her pulse hammering in her throat. This wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate, a trap laid with care. She dialed Daniel again, her call going straight to voicemail. "Daniel, call me back," she said, her voice sharp but fraying at the edges. "This isn't funny. Whatever you're doing, we need to talk." She hung up, her eyes darting to the street, half expecting to see him watching from a shadowed corner. The city offered no answers, only the drone of traffic and the indifferent march of pedestrians. Across town, Daniel Kane stood at the window of his rental apartment, a fresh cup of coffee in hand, the steam curling like a ghost in the morning light. The room was stark, its emptiness a mirror of the clarity he now felt. His phone lay on the coffee table, buzzing with Marissa's unanswered texts and voicemails. He didn't need to read them. He knew their rhythm, confusion giving way to anger, then to desperation. She was beginning to feel the walls closing in, the illusion of control slipping through her fingers. He sipped his coffee, black and bitter, and watched the city stir below. The plan was unfolding exactly as he'd designed, each piece locking into place with the precision of a watchmaker's craft. At 7:32 a.m., Marissa tried her credit card at a nearby cafe, her usual order, a latte with oat milk, already half prepared. The barista shook his head, sliding the card back. "Declined," he said, his tone apologetic but firm. Marissa frowned, pulling another card from her wallet. Declined again. Her cheeks flushed, a mix of embarrassment and disbelief. She paid with cash, her hands shaking as she counted out the bills. Back on the street, she checked her banking app, her breath catching as she saw the joint accounts frozen, the balances inaccessible. Her leased car, parked a block away, was gone, a courier having returned it to the dealership at dawn. She texted Daniel again. "What the hell is going on? Where's my car?" No reply. The silence was louder than any argument they'd ever had. By 8:15 a.m., the second wave hit. An email from HR, subject line, "Review required prior to meeting." Attached was a formal request for a discussion regarding potential policy violations. Another from her boss, clipped and professional. We need to speak this morning. 9:30, my office. Marissa's vision blurred as she read, her fingers gripping the phone like a lifeline. She tried to call Derek, her voice shaking as she left a message. Something's happening. I don't know what, but I need you to call me back. He didn't. She didn't know that, at that moment, Emily, Derek's wife, was sitting in her suburban kitchen, staring at a USB drive and a stack of photos delivered in the night. Emily's hands trembled too, but for different reasons. A marriage shattered, a future rewritten by truths she couldn't unsee. Marissa's world was unraveling, thread by thread, and she felt it now, the shift from certainty to dread. She hailed a cab, directing it to their house, her mind racing to piece together the scope of Daniel's actions. The locks had been changed, she discovered, her key useless against the deadbolt. Her belongings were gone, replaced by a storage unit receipt taped to the door, its address unfamiliar. She pounded on the door, her voice breaking as she called Daniel's name, but the house was silent, a fortress she no longer owned. A neighbor peered out, curious but distant, and Marissa turned away, her face burning with shame. She tried Lauren next, texting, I need to talk. Call me. No response. Lauren had changed her number, a fact Marissa wouldn't learn until later. The betrayal stung, but it was nothing compared to the realization that Daniel had outmaneuvered her. He hadn't confronted her with tears or rage. He'd waited, watched, and struck with a precision that left no room for counterplay. She remembered his voice at dinner, calm and final. This is acknowledgement. Closure. She'd thought he was broken, defeated. Now, she saw the truth. He'd been a predator, biding his time. Daniel, meanwhile, was already elsewhere, his mind unburdened by the chaos he'd unleashed. He'd resigned from his job a week ago, a detail Marissa had missed in her preoccupation with Derek. His new life was lean, untraceable, a rental apartment, a burner phone, a bank account she'd never touch. He sat at the kitchen counter, reviewing the divorce affidavit on his laptop, its pages a testament to her infidelity and deceit. The attorney had assured him it was ironclad, a legal blade that would sever their bond without mercy. Daniel felt no triumph, only relief. The man he'd been, the one who loved her, who forgave her silences, was gone, replaced by someone harder, sharper, forged in the crucible of her lies. Marissa's phone buzzed with another email, this one from the company's legal team, requesting her presence at an emergency meeting. Her badge was deactivated, her access to the firm's systems revoked. She stood on the sidewalk, her breath hitching as the scope of her ruin came into focus. She'd walked into that dinner thinking she held the upper hand, her confession a power play. Now, she saw it for what it was, a trap, baited with wine and nostalgia, sprung with a ruthlessness she'd never imagined Daniel capable of. She clutched the envelope, its note now a taunt, a promise of consequences she couldn't outrun. The city held its breath at 9:12 a.m., the morning light slicing through the haze like a verdict. Marissa Kane stood in the hallway of Daniel's rental apartment, her knock unanswered, her composure fraying like a worn thread. Her hair was unbrushed, her shirt wrinkled, the heels from last night's dinner now a cruel reminder of the woman she'd thought she was. Her makeup had smudged, leaving her face raw, exposed, a stranger's reflection in a world that no longer belonged to her. She rang the bell again, then texted, "We need to talk. I don't understand what's happening. Why are you doing this?" No response. The silence was a blade, sharp and deliberate, cutting deeper with each unanswered plea. Inside, Daniel Kane stood by the window, coffee in hand, the city sprawling below like a map of a war already won. His phone buzzed with Marissa's messages, each one a note in a symphony of desperation he'd orchestrated. He didn't answer, not out of cruelty, but because there was nothing left to say. The divorce papers were filed, the accounts frozen, her career in tatters. The envelope he'd left at the restaurant, a decoy note reading "Read this at home." Alone had done its job, keeping her off balance while the real blows landed. The HR email, the photos to Derek's wife, the locks changed, her life dismantled piece by meticulous piece. Daniel sipped his coffee, black and unyielding, and felt the weight of the past lift like fog burning off at dawn. Marissa's voicemail came at 9:22 a.m., her voice a jagged mix of anger and fear. You can't just disappear, Daniel. You owe me an explanation. You're acting like a coward. He didn't listen to it, just deleted it with a swipe, his expression unreadable. She wanted a scene, a dramatic clash to reclaim her narrative. But Daniel wasn't playing her game anymore. He'd spent months building a cage of evidence, texts, receipts, photos, a cloned phone's worth of betrayals, and last night, he'd locked her in it. The dinner, the wine, the quiet table. It was all choreography, a stage for her to confess before the curtain fell. At 9:30, Marissa tried the bell again, then pounded on the door, her voice muffled but rising. Daniel, open the door. A neighbor's curtain twitched across the hall, but no one intervened. The city didn't care about her unraveling, and neither did Daniel. He set his mug down, crossed to the door, and opened it, his face a mask of calm. Marissa froze, her hand raised mid-knock, her eyes wide with a mix of fury and desperation. She stepped inside without invitation, her movements jerky, as if her body couldn't keep up with her mind. What is this? She demanded, gesturing to the sparse apartment, bare walls, a single sofa, no trace of their shared life. Why did you change the locks? Shut down the accounts? What did you send to my job? Her voice cracked, the questions spilling out like blood from a wound. Daniel sat across from her, his hands resting loosely on his knees. You know why? He said, his tone even, almost gentle. You ambushed our marriage. I just returned the favor. Her jaw clenched, her eyes flashing. That's not fair. I was honest at dinner. You should have said something then, not this. She waved a hand, encompassing the chaos of her morning. The badge that didn't work, the emails from HR, the frozen accounts, the car gone, the house locked. I let you talk, Daniel said, leaning back slightly. I gave you the whole table. You poured the wine, played the part. I just watched the curtain fall. Marissa's breath hitched, her hands gripping the edge of the sofa. You're acting like you're above this, she said, her voice low, venomous. Like you're some saint passing judgment. I'm not, Daniel said quietly. I'm just done. She blinked, the words landing like a blow. For the first time, she seemed to see him, not the husband she'd pitted, not the man she'd dismissed, but someone else entirely. Someone who'd waited, watched, and struck with a precision she hadn't thought him capable of. I don't understand how you can be so cold, she said, her voice breaking. I made a mistake. No, Daniel interrupted, meeting her eyes. You made choices. Deliberate. Calculated. Repeated. He paused, letting the words sink in. You said you'd do it again. I believed you. Her hands trembled, knuckles pale against the sofa's fabric. I was unhappy, she whispered. I didn't think you cared anymore. You were wrong, Daniel said, his voice steady but not cruel. And now you're here, looking for a fight I don't need to have. Marissa's shoulders slumped, the last of her defiance crumbling. So what now? You're just going to ruin my life and walk away. Daniel almost smiled, a faint, bitter curve of his lips. I didn't ruin your life, he said. I stopped protecting the lie you built. She covered her face with her hands, a sob catching in her throat. For the first time in years, she looked small, stripped of the armor she'd worn so well, her confidence, her control, her carefully crafted image. Please, she whispered, her voice barely audible. We can fix this. We can't, Daniel said, his tone final. You already did everything you wanted to do. She looked up, tears streaking her face, her eyes searching his for a trace of the man who'd once loved her. She found nothing. I loved you, she said, the words fragile, almost a plea. I believe you, Daniel replied, his voice soft but unyielding. Once. He stood, crossing to the door and opening it. Marissa rose slowly, her movements heavy, as if gravity itself had turned against her. She paused at the threshold, turning to look at him one last time. I'm sorry, she said, the words hollow, too late. Daniel didn't respond. He closed the door behind her, the click of the latch final, like a period at the end of a sentence. The apartment was silent again, the city's hum a distant pulse beyond the walls. He walked to the window, watching Marissa cross the street below, her shoulders hunched, her steps slow, a woman finally understanding the weight of consequence. By noon, the final pieces would fall. The HR meeting would end with Marissa's suspension, pending an investigation into her financial misconduct. Derek's wife, Emily, would file for divorce, her attorney armed with the evidence Daniel had sent. Marissa's phone would keep buzzing, texts from colleagues, calls from Derek she wouldn't answer, notifications piling up like debris from a collapsing life. She'd try to rewrite the story, to play the victim, but the truth was out. A light shone on her house of mirrors, shattering every reflection she'd built. Daniel poured another coffee, the ritual grounding him in the present. He'd resigned from his job, severed ties with their shared past, and moved into this blank slate of a life. The divorce would be finalized in weeks, the affidavit ensuring no contest, no lingering battles. He didn't need her to suffer, only to face what she'd done. The pity she'd felt for him, the smugness she'd worn at dinner, the lies she'd spun, they were her undoing, not his. He stepped onto the balcony, the city unfolding before him, alive with possibility. The sun climbed higher, burning away the last of the morning's haze. Somewhere across town, Marissa was staring at her phone, her reflection, her ruin, seeing not the woman she'd wanted to be, but the one she'd become. Daniel took a breath, the air sharp and clean, and felt something he hadn't in years: peace. The show was over, and he was free. Daniel glanced at his phone, a final voicemail from Marissa waiting. He didn't play it. Instead, he poured another coffee and stepped onto the balcony, the city sprawling beneath him like a battlefield. Marissa was out there, scrambling, her empire of lies collapsing under its own weight. By noon, she'd know the full extent of what she'd lost, not just him, but everything she'd built on deception. And Daniel? He'd be here, in the quiet, watching the world turn without her.